And in the detention center, I was only allowed to eat 150 kernels of corn per day. At night, the guards would storm into our cells and force us to recite the rules of the camp. And there were many rules. If you misquoted even one of them, they would force you to stand all night reciting the rules until work began the next morning. And it was on one of those sleepless nights that I vowed I would not die here and I would escape North Korea again. So a Chinese citizen reported me to the authorities, and there is a North Korean kid. Please come arrest them and deport them back. And I've heard that they would get reward for reporting North Koreans and sending them back to North Korea. My dad was living with a North Korean defector girlfriend, and she actually brought three of her own kids to China. One night when I was having a dinner with my family, the door burst open and this Chinese policeman came into our house and drew a gun on us and started yelling, 别动,别动,别动, meaning like, don't move, don't move. And then they came in and they gathered us all, not my dad, and then handcuffed us and brought us downstairs and shoved in the back of the police cars in China. It's a black sedan. There was no indication that this was a police. And people wearing black suits and then carrying some sort of pistol and then came to us and just arrested us and just brought us down. Yeah, and then they took us to Chinese jail, directly to the border town jail. And I, was sent to Chinese prison for about 12 days. I was in there, I got, interrogated, and they asked me specific questions of, basically asked me, what did you do in the entire 9 months? Like, who did you meet? What did you eat? Where did you go? Who are you with? All the necessary details, even what kind of color was your poop? I mean, that's in those kind of specific details. And they took my fingerprints, they took a picture of me, and then eventually, and also the worst part was that the food that we're getting, in the first couple of days, I didn't eat the prison food because, I still had the outside meat. Outside meat meaning I still had meat on my, a body where, I'm not that hungry because I have a standards. I have a high standards because I was eating food outside of the prison. And when I came into Chinese prison, it wasn't a food. It was a leftover, a food trash from the prison guards. And I would often find bottle caps in my food, some sort of a bottle caps and plastic, metal, because it's a food trash that they throw away, and they feed us that. And yeah, it was horrible. And there were about 6 or 7 other inmates, North Korean defectors who've been already caught. I was in the prison for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, we got on a truck and we're all chained together to other North Korean refugees, so we can't jump or we can't escape. And then we were brought back to North Korea. And I knew right away that I was in big trouble as soon as I stepped off that truck. And the guards were screaming at me to get off the truck. And then we were shoved into this interrogation room, and they're beating me, and I could hear other inmates that are screaming that, please stop, my leg is broken, I'm bleeding, my arm is broken. I could hear it because the wall was pretty thin, and I was terrified. I was terrified of being beaten because it's gonna happen to me. And I wish that I'm 15 years old. Hopefully they go easy on me. And the North Korean secret police actually wanted me to confess that I was trying to defect to South Korea. But the truth was, I went to China to live with my dad, and I begged them to understand, and I didn't confess that I was trying to defect to South Korea because that was not the truth. I went to China to live with my father. And after, interrogating me for hours, and eventually about 2 weeks, about 12 days later, they sent me to a North Korean defectors detention center. I was told that I would only be there for a couple of weeks because I was so young. I was only 15. You know, most American 15 years olds are sophomore in high school. Their lives are full of going to sports practices and driving ed classes and, just hanging out with friends. At 15, I was in a labor camp, basically a labor camp, working 12 hours every day. I was terrified of being beaten again, so I worked really hard for the first few months. And months passed, and I was not released. There were no bed sheets. There were no blankets. There were no there are no pillows. There were no pillows provided. There is no bed. It was just on the ground. And I went into the North Korean defectors detention center wearing the same clothes that I got captured with. I slept with the same clothes because they didn't provide anything else. And I worked in the same clothing for 9 months. And there were no showers. There are no hygiene practices. The labor camp, the cells were crawling with lice and lice eggs. And in the detention center, I was only allowed to eat 150 kernels of corn per day. One day, we're marching in our rows to our work sites, and I saw a dry vomit on the road. I was so hungry that I got on my hands and knees and began picking the rice out of the vomit. I didn't stop eating the vomited rice until the beating from the guards were too unbearable. One time, I was so hungry that I picked a corn out of my own poop. And I also had to eat a live rat while I was working in the farming zone. While I was working at a farming place, I saw a newborn rat, newborn mice, and I needed to eat that to survive. I was so hungry that it really didn't matter to me. It was alive. I just ate it. So one day when I was in the defectors detention center, this guy comes up to me and says, "You have a choice. Either you can give me your shoes voluntarily, or I would beat the living crap out of you and I'll take it from you." And I had no choice because, he's an adult, I'm a child, and he wants my shoes. Like, I didn't want it to get beat up. So I voluntarily gave him my shoes, and he was happy. And, and in return, I got his shoes, which is all dirty and is torn apart. And I could barely walk in it because it's an adult shoe. So it's a little bit bigger than my shoe was. So I did, and eventually he was released to his hometown, and I don't know what happened to him. At night, the guards would storm into our cells and force us to recite the rules of the camp. And there were many rules, and you had to memorize them. If you misquoted even one of them, they would force you to stand all night reciting the rules until work began the next morning. And it was on one of those sleepless nights that I vowed I would not die here and I would escape North Korea again. Eventually, I was assigned to be a security to look over people that are sleeping so that they're not doing anything suspicious. I started praying to God that, "God, please don't let me die like this. God, please be with me. Please help me. Please help me to get out of here." And the cell was very small, and there was a metal, I could, right after, so there is no a hallway. There's a window, and there's a metal bars, and then the window was open constant, all the time, so that the guards would actually come in and just look into the window. And I could actually look up the sky, and while I was praying, I was holding onto the metal bars, and I felt this sense of peace in my heart that, I don't even know if I'm gonna make it out of here alive, or even am I gonna make it tomorrow, because I'm just so malnourished. I can't even walk that straight. And this overwhelming sense of peace that came to my heart, like all the anxieties were gone, all the scaredness, all the like fear in that moment, looking up to the sky, holding onto the bar while praying. So I believe that was God communicating with me, that assuring me that, you know, that I'll be okay, that I will go home. And eventually I was released. And 9 months later, I was finally released because I could not even stand up or even lift my arms. And I had lost so much weight that I was a worthless worker. And they sent me back to my half-brother's house. And when I got to my half-brother's house, my half-brother burned all of my clothing that I was wearing for 9 months. And I could hear the sound of popping the lice. And he shaved my head because there were so many lice eggs in my hair. Each strap of hair, it was just white because there were just so many those lice eggs in my head. And it was terrible. I was malnourished. I couldn't even walk. I could barely walk. I could barely walk. And eventually I came to my half-brother's house and I spent many months trying to regain my strength.